and welcome to this video. My name is Miriam and I read a lot of books in the past week, which is definitely a good thing because I challenged myself in 2021 to read 365 books. And I was a bit behind on my challenge, but I'm getting back on track, so I'm really excited about all the books I'm going to show you this week. I'm really happy that I'm back on track because I was starting to feel a bit anxious about it and I was not really considering giving up. Now, I want to accomplish this challenge so badly, but I started to sort of forget about the other things in my life that are really nice, like doing creative stuff and all that sort of things. So I'm glad that I'm back on track and I got a sort of strategy worked out for March, so I won't be as far behind as I was in February. This was mainly to blame on the Mistborn trilogy I read because those books were all more than 700 pages long. Yeah, and that did not really help. For those of you who don't know yet, every week I do a weekly wrap-up video in which I tell you about the books I read in the past week. This week's weekly wrap-up video is about the books I read from Saturday the 20th of February until Friday the 26th of February. And I read 12 books in that time. I'm so excited about that. I sort of noticed that in my other weekly wrap-up videos I don't tell you much about the books I read. I just say I really enjoyed this book, and I want that to be different. I want to say at least one sentence about each book that is not I really enjoyed this book or I hated this book, but just a bit more detail what the book is about and why I liked it. But if I do that, the videos might get a bit longer. I want to keep the pressure low, but still I'd like to tell you a bit more about the books I read. So without further ado, let's dive into the books I read. The first book of the week was Holding Up the Universe. This was a reread for me. I read it a couple of years ago when I bought it. This book is about Jack, who is face blind and he doesn't want anyone to know, and about Libby, who is a teenager who has a bit of overweight, but actually, when her mom died when she was about 9 years old, she started eating a lot. It was so bad that she had to be towed out of her house. I think they had to break things of their house down to get her out of it, and then she got into a clinic and they helped her, and now she has lost a lot of weight. She still has more weight than the average teenager, and at the beginning of the book she goes to high school for the first time. Jack has trouble remembering people's faces, and they all have their marks, how he can remember who's who, and obviously it is easy for him to see who Libby is, but that's also not a very good thing. I think this book was a very cute book about teenagers, and it wasn't the average YA book. And I think that's why I like to reread it again, and why I still liked it, because I have the feeling that a lot of books I liked a couple of years ago I wouldn't really like if I read them now. So I'm sort of trying that out by rereading YA books now and then. And this was a positive reread. I did a sort of readathon weekend. I planned to do a readathon on Saturday, and then I turned out to be reading almost the entire Sunday as well. So that's why I read so many books. I read 7 books in a weekend. So that sort of explains it. Next came Jennifer, and I was about 6 or 7 books behind on my challenge, so I wanted to read a novella. And this is Jennifer by Dee Henderson. It's the Dutch version, but it has the same title in English. And it's book 0, or like a prequel to the O'Malley series, and I read a book in the O'Malley series, so I knew what was going on. Jennifer is a doctor, and she meets another doctor. I can't remember. Oh, his name is Tom. I was going to say I can't remember his name, but I can. His name is Tom, and they fall in love, and they talk about Christianity, and at the end of the book they find out that Jennifer has cancer. And because I already read one of the books in the O'Malley series, I knew this was going to happen, so it wasn't a big surprise. But it was great to read the book that tells me a bit more about Jennifer. And then I finished Every Good Endeavour by Tim Keller. This is the Dutch version, that's why it says Goed, werk. And I did not read this entire book on Saturday, only the last 2 chapters. I had been reading it for quite some time. I think the most important lesson I learned from this book is that there are no jobs that are holier than other jobs. All jobs people work at are a good job, and you don't have to be a minister to be in the service of the Lord. That's what I took from it. The fourth book of the week was an ebook. So it was De Torens van Februari, a Dutch original by Tonke Dragt, who happens to be the author of my all-time favorite book, The Letter for the King. The title of this book can be translated as The Towers of February, and I believe that in 1977 it was translated into English, but I'm not entirely sure of that. This book was like one of the biggest surprises of the week. It's a YA sci-fi book, I think, and well, the sort of magic or the time traveling bit, it's all very simple, but I think that's actually the beauty of it. Just because of its simplicity, it really works. I did not really expect I would like this book. I borrowed it from the library a couple of years ago, and then I did not get through the first chapter, but now I wanted to get through it. Well, I said to myself I have to read at least 20% of this book before I decide I will finish it or not. And I really enjoyed the book. I think I ended up giving it like 4 stars or something like that. It was a surprising book. It's not about time traveling. I think I said time traveling, but it is about traveling to other universes. Considering the fact that this book is from 1976, I think that's really great. The fifth book of the week was Dietrich Melista, which is the Dutch translation of My Dearest Dietrich by Amanda Barratt. And I was going to say it is the love story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I'm sorry, I still can't say his name, but I try. And his fiancée, but it is more than a love story. It was about the Second World War in Germany, and I'm really intrigued by books about the Second World War that take place in Germany, because Germany was always described as like the big enemy, especially in the Netherlands. To read from the perspective of German people that the war was definitely not easy for them as well is really a great thing to read. It took me also a lot about Christianity, and it made me wonder, what would I do? What if I was in their position? What would my decisions be? I was going to give this book 5 stars, but then for some reason I did not really like the epilogue at the end. Yeah, epilogues are usually at the end of the book. So yeah, I did not really like that, and therefore I subtracted like half a star or a quarter of a star, I don't know. And I know, see, the author couldn't have done it any different, but yeah, I don't know. It just didn't feel like it was part of the story, like it really added something to it. I'm sort of starting to lose count of the books. The next book I read was Turtles All the Way Down by John Green, and I've attempted to read books by John Green quite often. I've tried to read The Fault in Our Stars, I tried to read An Abundance of Catherines, and I tried to read Paper Towns, I think. And I just couldn't get through them. I'm not very intrigued by his books. But I gave Turtles All the Way Down a chance, and I read it and I quite enjoyed it. Well, I promised I would say more about what the books were about, but I can't remember the name of the main character, so that's really bad. Probably because it was written from the first person perspective, so you don't read the name of the main characters often as you would if you read a different book. But I think the theme of this book, mental health and how you can like keep on thinking and that spiral in your head can go on forever and ever, I think that was very well described. And I also love the friendship in this book. I did not really like the storylines that were about love, but I did like the friendship part. The next book I read is Twinkeling. It is the Dutch translation of Playing by the Heart, written by Deborah Raney, and this was also a reread, and I read it because it is about a writer who has to finish her book, but she's living in the house of her sister, and that's been renovated because they have to sell it and she can't write. But her next door neighbor tells that she can probably write in a bed and breakfast. I think it was a bed and breakfast that's run by a friend of her, and that friend of hers is a man called Arthur, and he lost his wife, so the bed and breakfast is not really, they're not really doing anything with it anymore. But obviously Maddie, the main character, the writer, can write her book in his bed and breakfast house thing. And the funny thing is that they both think, Maddie thinks that Arthur is an elderly man and he's enjoying his pension and everything like that. And Arthur, who is in the end of his 30s, I think, thinks that Maddie, who is like mid-30s, is a very elderly lady. When Maddie is in his house, they start exchanging notes, and obviously the inevitable happens, they fall in love with one another. And what I like, that this book made me fall in love with writing again, so I really wanted to get some writing done when I finished this book. The next book I read was One Dog Scribe by Markus Zusak, and when I was like halfway through, I realized that this was the third book in the Wolf Brothers series, and maybe that's the reason why I did not really enjoy this book, or like why I really didn't enjoy this book. But it felt so... there was no plot. I couldn't find it. And so far I've read 3 books by Markus Zusak. The Book Thief, which made me fall in love with his writing style and his books. And then I read Bridge of Clay, and that was a sort of, not really disappointment, but I felt a bit disappointed when I read that book. And then I read When Dogs Cry, and on Goodreads I saw someone who said that the Wolf Brothers trilogy is like the pundit version of Bridge of Clay, and I agree with that statement. So no, I would not recommend this book. However, I did like the writing style. I really like Markus Zusak's writing style. He writes very short sentences, and that helps a lot with reading. The book that came next is actually like a book that I used to read a lot when I was young. It's called The Duiventil. It's a Dutch original, obviously, and I can't really think of a correct translation. But this book is like a description of family life, and it is... well, the books are really nice to read, and you feel like you're part of that family. And this is actually the first book in a long series. It has 9 books. A friend of mine, when she reads series, she reads 1 book every month. And I'm planning on doing that with this series, so I'll read 1, maybe 2 books a month of this series. So you will see other books with the Duiventil in it, because every book in that series has that name in it. Because it's the name of the house that the family lives in. And yeah, I get why I liked it when I was younger, but I saw quite a lot of flaws in this book. One of them is that there are a lot of perspectives. Because it's about a big family, they have 8 children, and they get 2 more children actually in future books. And you read like from everyone's perspective, and also from the next door neighbor, and from someone who comes to help in their house, and sometimes that can feel a bit overwhelming. The next book I read was a book called Verbeter, schrijfstijl by Wim Daniëls. It's a Dutch non-fiction book on writing. It can be translated as improve your writing style or improve your writing. And this was a good book for me to read because, as you know, I also write books. But a couple of years ago I went to a seminar for authors. The seminar was a bit of a summary of this book, so I knew quite a lot of things that were dealt with in this book. 11th book I finished this week was Voor, leeuwen, the Dutch translation of Fire and Lions. And yeah, well, this is about the prophet Daniel and his wife. The problem I had with this book is that it has one perspective is like the first person perspective, that's from Daniel's wife, but then it's also written from Daniel's perspective, and that's like the third person perspective. And that felt a bit unnatural to me. Another thing is that there were some bits in this book and I did not really think it was believable, so I think I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars, and there were some absolute wonderful things in it, and it's not that I thought this book was bad, but I did not enjoy it as much as the other book by this author I read, and I did not enjoy it as much as I would with other biblical fiction. And lastly, the book I finished that I had been reading for an entire month, or like listening to an entire month. Now it feels like I was listening to it throughout the month, every day and night, and that wasn't. I'm talking about The Shadow Sister, the third book in the Seven Sisters series by Lucinda Riley. And my, this book was boring. I'm sorry. No, I'm not really sorry, but I thought this book was quite boring. Only at like when I was like 60% through it, I started to enjoy it more, and that was actually, I listened to the last 40% in the past week, I think. Well, the thing is, when I went on walks, I did not really enjoy listening to this book. I just wanted to be alone with my thoughts. And that was also because the book was not as interesting as other audiobooks I've listened to. So, yeah, I do want to continue. But the thing is, and I've got this with all Lucinda Riley books, is that her characters are also... I do not think that all her characters are very believable. And too many coincidences happen in the book. And the love story in this book, like what the person Star, the main character of the book, ended up with, well, she did not know his name. I mean, everyone called him Mouse. She knew that his name started with an O, but the thing is, when someone sends me a text message and I know that person as Mouse, and he ends his text message with O, then the first thing I would ask if I met him was, what's your full name? But the main character isn't, and probably because he is shy, but at the end of the book, when she's already like dating him and she's on a holiday with him, he finally reveals his real name to her, which was Uno Mouse or something like that. So, no, I did not really like that, and there were some other things that I was like, oh, yeah, big deal, why are you worrying about this? But anyway, I'm glad I finished this book, and first I'll be listening to some other, also shorter audiobooks before I continue with this series, because I pledged myself to finish this series, so I will do that. And hopefully the next book will be a bit more interesting. I'm very interested about the fourth sister, about Cece. The last chapter in the third book was about her. And while at first I thought she wasn't a very great character, I think she has a very interesting story. So hopefully I won't be too disappointed if I listen to the next book. These were all the books I read in the past week, and I'm glad that I'm back on track and I don't want to be that far behind ever again. But the thing is, if I'm behind on my challenge, I feel guilty for all the time I spend doing something else apart from reading, and I don't want that guilt. So I want to be on track or a bit ahead of the challenge, but not far behind. So hopefully in March I will be able to read some very great books and remain on track, or even or read even more than 31 books in a month. I'm hoping to read 35, but if I read 31, that's absolutely great. Well, anyway, I got big plans. I got a lot of great books to read in March. I actually got a lot of great books for my birthday, so yeah, I'm really happy about that. I hope you enjoyed this video, even though it was a bit longer than my usual weekly wrap-up videos. Let me know in a comment what you think of my new strategy to tell you a bit more about the books I read. If you want to know if I can read 35 books in a month, then subscribe to my channel. And as always, happy reading!